Welcome to the IAB UK Podcast.
Welcome back to this 3-part mini-series in partnership with TikTok. And over these 3 episodes, we're going to be talking about a number of different themes that are important to us, that are important to the industry, and of course, are important to TikTok. In episode 1, we talked with Charlotte about measurement. And in the next episode, we're talking to Giles about policy. But now we're going to zero in on creative performance. And I'm joined by Callum Smith, who's TikTok's marketing strategy lead for creative. Now, you've heard of ROI and you've probably heard of ROAS. But what about return on creative? We'll be getting into all of that and more. But Callum, welcome to the podcast. Let's start and talk about brand loyalty and the role that creative plays when it comes to that.
Firstly, thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.
It's such a privilege to be here. Brand loyalty, I guess, well, if you spoke to the Byron Sharps of this world, brand loyalty doesn't really exist. It's this weird ethereal function that happens as part of the double jeopardy law. But I think there are ways that we can influence and build saliency in the minds of audiences in really interesting ways through the medium of creativity. And that's been proven time and time again over the last 15 to 20 years. But I think in this kind of this age of media fragmentation, of unparalleled levels of distortion and distraction, it's never been more important to find that unique, interesting, flavoursome, colourful way to just cut through some of that noise.
Yeah.
And I think once you find that way, you use creativity almost as that scalpel or a cleaver to kind of cut the way through, you find ways to engage with audiences that maybe you've never thought of before. And those types of engagements just take you to these interesting places in their minds that mean that you just have a bigger presence. You're just there more often in more interesting ways, and they're both their hearts, their minds, and their purchasing habits. And I think that's just a really interesting concept.
On TikTok specifically, I mean, it feels such a unique place to do storytelling. We were talking in the first episode with Charlotte about how in a strange way the hang up with digital advertising has always been it's been bottom of the funnel and very performance driven, and DR quite the opposite with TikTok. It's very much about storytelling and building brand. What is so unique about TikTok in that sense?
I think it was really interesting just to latch on for a second to ROI. You know, the advent of digital was totally game changing, as everyone knows. But it gave us an immediate way to measure, right? Immediate way to point to something and say, look, that's the value that I'm creating.
Yeah.
What that meant is we kind of ruined ourselves to a degree where it became a bit of a race to the bottom. Because in everything that we needed to do, we needed to have something that we could point to and say that that's the ROI. And we became incredibly performance oriented, particularly through digital channels. I think what happens with TikTok and some other short form video channels is that because there is this inflection point where all of a sudden the priority becomes entertaining the user, right? Because you're in these skippable formats. All of a sudden, the power is in the user, right? If I don't know your advert, I don't have to watch it. I don't even have to watch the first 50 seconds. I'll just swipe through. We talk a lot about what the big arch nemesis is of marketers now, and I would say it's the finger. You know, kind of use this term. Some people say the finger is mightier than the sword, or the pen is mightier than the sword, but I would argue that it's actually the finger. In marketing, right? Because that's the thing that will just swipe straight past you. So when you start to really realize that and place the importance on entertaining or exciting or engaging with that audience first, you start to see these really, really wonderful results, which is that it's a really wonderful way to start building brand in a really, really lovely way. And then, of course, once you start to build branding, you start to see that power of creativity, that power of entertaining your audiences, that value exchange of giving something to them before wanting to kind of extract something. All of a sudden, I'm really, really engaged. And you can apply that same philosophy, that mentality, both to branding or to performance, and see much greater effectiveness, which I think is fantastic.
And is that what you mean when you talk about this return on creative? So there's obviously ROI, there's ROAS, there's any number of different acronym soup that you can use to figure out if something's working. Talk to me a bit more about return on creative specifically.
It's something we were struggling with a lot when we think about creativity. I think it would be a given to say that creative is at the heart of what TikTok is, and short form video at large. The category is really about. But often it's kind of becomes this afterthought, particularly in the acronym soup of kind of ROAS and ROI. You can kind of forget a little bit about creativity. And as we've just talked about, there are really great reasons why creativity should kind of almost be prioritized. So we were trying to find a way to talk to marketers to really help bridge that gap, which is ROI is the be all and end all. I mean, it's the beginning and the end. And actually, there's a really nice perspective on that, which is the beginning can be creativity. And when you put creativity first, creativity, and ROC, as we call it, return on creative, lives within this bigger bubble of ROI. So it's not that it's fighting against it, it's perfectly complementary. But once you start with what's my creative, how do I use it in this really interesting way to really drive the kind of saliency and mental availability we all want? That also then feeds really nicely into ROI. It gives you everything that you wanted, and it also unlocks a lot of opportunity. There's another part of return on creativity, which is the obvious is the immediate creative effectiveness. That drives ROI. Yeah. Fantastic. But there are lots of other ways that when you are more creative particularly in short form video and social platforms, you unlock lots of other opportunities. So you'll see that there are brands that have created these kind of very playful identities that have these incredible comment and community management strategies, right? Yeah. And that almost for some brands, that's now their primary focus on these channels, is that obviously there's the creating assets, the really great assets, but a lot of the value they're extracting is actually in the comments section. Mind-boggling. That's an entirely new field, right? And that's allowing people to really engage with those current, future customers in ways that they've never really thought about before, or it's actually, maybe that's not true. It's reflective of the kind of the old way that we used to do, community or customer relations and management. But it's done in a much more interesting, playful way that benefits as well from the scale and reach that you see from other people in the comment section.
Thinking about interesting and playful, how do brands show up on TikTok when it comes to creativity? I mean, it just feels like it's this place where if I'm a luxury brand who might actually have some nervousness about something like TikTok, I can kind of show up there in a different way to what I perhaps do in a digital 6-sheet somewhere else. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I hope it's really interesting to everyone else that's listening, which is, I think there's two ways to look at this. There's the perception that TikTok is this entirely new beast, right? And that, the rule book needs to be ripped up and chucked away.
Which is what we did with a bunch of other social platforms as well. It's like, here's how you do creative on our things. You need to go create loads of new stuff. You need to...
And I think we went through that journey. Yeah. And I think there were lots of ways that, as with any channel, the way that brands can often best show up is try to reflect some of the tenets that we see user-generated users do, or the kind of editorial, let's call it either editorial or user content, whether that's TV, radio, or whether it's on social platform. On TikTok, at the beginning, that was very kind of personal, very human, very kind of what we would consider to be, at the time, lo-fi. Yeah. So I think in that way, yes, there was a time circa 3 or 4 years ago when turning up on TikTok really required you to kind of rethink how you as a brand operated within that medium and that environment in order to kind of reflect those principles and those values that the UGC content was kind of reflecting or embodying. What we found now is actually that still all holds true. Yeah. But you can turn up in all of the ways that you're already really familiar with. But just you really have to prioritize the entertainment factor.
Got it.
Okay, and I'll give you 2 examples. One is someone let's say a really luxe fashion brand, let's say like a Balenciaga, let's say, a phenomenal brand, fantastic brand. And I would say they found a way to come on that platform for an incredibly high price point, high luxe brand, and find that niche inside themselves, which was quite playful, a little bit surreal, a bit hallucinatory. And they honed in on it. They just create these weird, warped pieces of content that just felt really resonant and really interesting, almost a bit of surprise and delight.
But it was there anyway. They didn't reinvent themselves
exactly.
for TikTok.
There was that part inside them already that existed. They were just kind of bringing it to the fore where it most benefited the platform. On the other hand, you have the brand du jour or someone like a Liquid Death.
Oh, yeah.
And I would challenge anyone that's listening, if you're not already looking at them on a TikTok, go and check them out. But on there, they'll be doing both lo-fi content, either themselves or with creators, but they'll also be doing cuts of their TV assets.
Yeah, nice.
Right? Those assets, those TV assets and those creativity, those kind of creator-led assets are just really entertaining.
Yeah.
They're just joyful, right? There's an insight in there that's interesting. It feels human. It feels humorful. It just really, really works. I think we need to always come back to this understanding and putting the audience first and thinking, what are they here for? Mostly they're here to be entertained. Well, okay, if I can give them that bit of entertainment. We talked about the value exchange before. If I can invest that, if I can give that to them as a brand, whether that's Liquid Death with their TVC or whether that's, Balenciaga with a really playful, weird branded effect that feels really kind of lo-fi. It just works. It just works because you're creating a resonance. I think and that is the key. Create that resonance. Find what works. Find that angle of yourself that works. That already exists within every single brand. There is a playful part in every brand somewhere. Or even like if there's not a particularly playful part there's maybe some categories where there are greater restrictions, but maybe there is an educational element to that. And there was again some entertainment or value in helping someone be more today intellectually or from a knowledge perspective than they were yesterday. Again, there's a value exchange there, and that works also really well on TikTok. So this principle of just being really audience first is the secret to being really fantastic on TikTok or any other short form video platform.
It also feels like, just from what you're saying, that it does feel like a bit of a sandbox where you don't have to get it right first time and that pressure. You can try lots of stuff, and the stuff that's going to bubble up is the stuff that kind of works. You can have a slightly different mentality with that.
You're totally right. And I love that. And we talk about this quite a bit with clients, which is the vast majority of users spend most of their time within the reel or within the For You page or wherever that, within the environment where the feed is kind of rolling through. What that means is that the algorithm kind of finds all of the stuff that's most resonant to you, most interesting to you, kind of speaks to your needs and your wants and your world. And it pulls it through. Wonderful. What that gives us is an opportunity because we have our profile pages, which are basically, as you say, really well said, sandboxes. And those are kind of really free, safe spaces to explore what is that brand identity that we've got? What is that niche or that nugget or that seed inside ourselves that would be really interesting to kind of bring out, pull out? And you can test and learn in that environment with very little risk. And you'll immediately see a signal. You'll start to get views. It'll be fed through to the For You page. You'll get engagement. That's when you can start to go, that's my thing. Yeah. There it is. That's maybe the bit of me, and that's the bit inside me or our brand that we can maybe latch onto and build from. So spectacular. We've grown up in this world where making really brave, creative decisions, embracing creative bravery has come with a bunch of risk. Being on TikTok and using the kind of profile page, creating content there, understanding your identity, totally safe. Yeah. You can do that in a way you've never done before. Yeah. And this is coming back to what we talked about when return on creativity, which is, create really great creative assets. You're going to get creative effectiveness. You're going to get return. You're going to get market share, brand growth, etc. Fantastic. Wonderful. But also there are these kind of like secondary benefits, returns on creativity, which is you could find an entirely new piece of brand positioning
that's the best
on
bit.
TikTok that then you apply to every other channel that you operate within. It could completely revolutionize and change the shape of who you are and how you operate as a brand.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because I think so much of media planning is all about getting to these assertions, getting into something tight. When actually we're saying, kind of put it out there, and you're gonna find surprises. You're gonna find things that resonate. You're also gonna find surprises. I want to ask you about storytelling, specifically TikTok as a platform. How has it kind of challenged, sort of inverted commas, traditional storytelling? Like, creators have learned how to tell stories in 30-second tele ads, narrative arc, that kind of stuff. We've learned how to do long copy on big, cross-platform outdoor ads. What's TikTok done? Has it sort of disrupted that a little bit? Have creatives had to figure out how to tell stories slightly differently? Or is it just more about what you said, it's entertainment, and sort of give it to them quick because we've got this finger going through?
Yeah, it's a really great question. There's a really idyllic, kind of like idealist part of me, which would go, all of that really holds true on TikTok. All of the long form copyright, all the kind of principles behind long form copywriting can be applied to really wonderful script writing. We see people like Hilton creating 10-minute TikToks that have done phenomenally well, that have been award-winning. The way that we tell really interesting stories and sculpt narrative arcs also holds true. I think what probably was the defining point was, again, this idea of skippability. And I think before in some of the more traditional mediums, you didn't need to grab attention in those first few seconds.
Yeah.
Because there was kind of broad beam attention happening, let's say with TV. And so that I was there long enough that if something interesting was to happen, then I could then lock in and apply a narrow beam to it. But on TikTok, that's not the case. We talked about the finger being the baddie, this kind of like evil force, right? And you got to fight against it all the time. So on TikTok, I think from a storytelling perspective, it was really, the shift was, you got to grab people's attention. You've got 1 or 2 seconds. In fact, less than that. I think there's some really interesting data, which is that people on kind of short form video can notice the furniture around an ad or an asset in terms of like where the labeling is, whether it's commission paid or whether this is sponsored or whatever that is, or if it's from a brand, within about half a second.
Wow.
A second, right? Your brain is operating so quickly that they're so used to this behavior and this environment that they can see those nuanced changes. So people are identifying whether things are of value to them, whether that's UGC or branded content, in a split second. That means you really have to think about, what are you going to do in those very first few moments that is going to convey the value that you're going to deliver, give them a promise, pull them in, and then you can start to tell your story. But it's those first few seconds that are just are so vitally important. And that doesn't mean, in the classical digital example would be like, okay, well, let's shove our brand.
Let's get the logo up front.
And actually, on TikTok, and I really want to say this, I think this is another lovely topic, which is, there is not a place where branding is not celebrated more than on TikTok by users. But again, if you create a vehicle of value, they don't care.
Yeah.
If you come to me as a brand and you're like, entertain me, or I've got a giggle, or you're surprise and delight me, or whatever that is, and your brand and product is all over it, I don't mind. I'm here for it, as long as there is that exchange that is happening. But just to go back to the hook point, which is what we call those first few seconds, it's really important to hook their attention, and you can do that with your brand and product. But you just need to make sure that you do it in a way that is additive to that experience rather than kind of degrading it. Because again, you're just going to lose them. They're just going to skip straight past it.
Yeah, the best creators do it so well.
They do it fantastically.
Callum, thank you so much. It was absolutely fascinating. We could be talking for hours. This is absolutely
I would
brilliant.
love to.
Thank you so much. So that's episode 2 of our 3-part mini-series with TikTok. So we've covered measurement and we've covered creative performance. Up next, we're talking to Giles Derrington in episode 3, and we'll be getting into policy. But for now, thank you very much indeed for listening and for watching.
IAB UK, building a better future for digital advertising for the benefit of everyone.